Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's. At Local Joe's, we help local business. Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's.
Today we're continuing with a series of interviews we are doing with candidates for Ingham County Prosecutor. Voters will decide on August 2nd who the Democratic and Republican candidates should be. And with us today are the Republican candidates, and first up is Billy O'Berry. Billy, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be on the show.
My pleasure, and I want to talk a little politics with you first, because it's hard enough to get elected to office, and as you would know, you've run for judge a number of times. Even harder to get elected to a countywide office here as a Republican. So I wondered, why are you a Republican?
That's a very good question. I think we forget that Abraham Lincoln was a Republican, and he was a president that was the voice for individuals that did not have a voice back in the 1800s. And of course, he's the president that signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and he wanted to verify the 13th Amendment, which was not customary at that time for a president to do, but he wanted to make sure that, that there was no slavery, and also that all people never would be put in a position of involuntary servitude, which is very timely today because of this human trafficking issue that is going on and seems to be growing at an alarming rate. And while I'm from a working class family, my grandfathers both came from southeastern Kentucky, worked in the coal mines, and my parents were brought to Michigan as migrant workers, worked in the fields with the Hispanic population. And also, my mother was very instrumental in working to unionize her small shop in Jackson. And she was very proud of that. So I am very much in favor of the working class and the rights of working class. And in fact, I'm one of the original employees in the city of Lansing who was instrumental in the Teamsters 214 unionizing the professional technical workers in the city of Lansing, of which I am still a union steward. So I'm an interesting mix. I studied the labor movement at Michigan State University undergrad. I also studied the rights of minorities and their issues that were of substance over the course of the history. And I have chosen to run as a Republican based on all of that information. And this really isn't about politics. This is really about service to the community. Who can best serve this community of Ingham County? Who has the expertise, the knowledge, the reputation? I don't have to come on and say, I'm going to show you I have integrity. I've lived in this community since I was 12 years old. People know me. I attended high school in Dansville. I went to Lansing Community College. I went to Michigan State University, and I went to what's now Western Michigan University College of Law. And I've worked for the city of Lansing for 29 years as an assistant city attorney. And I, to my knowledge, am the longest serving attorney in the city attorney's office with 29 years of experience. I've worked for 4 mayors and 5 city attorneys, and soon to be another new but old city attorney, because he was a previous city attorney. I'm not referring to his chronological age, but he was previously a city attorney. And people know my reputation. They know that I will be tough, but I am fair. And I think as a public servant, you have a duty which has been breached, severely breached by the recent events at the prosecutor's office. And you have a duty to be open and accessible and communicate with your public. Let them know what's going on in the office. It should not be a secret.
So my question, first question about what you might be facing was what you think the biggest issue is. It sounds like the integrity of the office is your biggest concern.
Unfortunately, what has occurred at the at the prosecuting attorney's office is it hurts all government officials, because there's already a preconceived notion that government employees are there to just earn a pension. They're just looking for a job, and they really don't care about the public. And I've actually had people say, well, may I ask you a question? I said, of course you can ask me a question. That's what I'm here for. That's part of my obligation to this community, is to answer any questions that you have. No one is ever above answering questions for the public and communicating with them. And unfortunately, like I said, there's this impression that there were secretive things going on, and that it hurts all of us because it perpetuates that belief that government employees are not really there serving the public, but they're out doing other things. And I want to say the reason why I am running for this job is because I'm not looking for a job. In fact, a gentleman that I met recently said he was very glad to have met me personally, and he said, you are very different in your outlook. He said, you are not looking for a job. I said, no, I'm not. I have a job, but I want to serve the community as your prosecutor because I believe that I can help provide justice in a better manner, more efficient and more effective than what has been occurring in the last numerous years.
Well, so obviously Stuart Dunnings is accused of a serious breach of law and ethics, but does that mean that the office, apart from that, was badly run?
The office actually has some very good people that are there in the office. I know them personally. As a city attorney for Lansing, we often work with the prosecutor's office in the prosecution of cases. We, of course, do prosecution in the city of Lansing under ordinance. Prosecutor's office does prosecution under state law statutes, but many times there's overlap. For example, we both do prosecution of drunk driving, frequenting drug houses, property damage, assault and batteries, those kinds of things. So I know many of them, of the prosecutors there, very well. However, it's unfortunate because it's difficult for them to escape the taint. There has been a breach of a fiduciary duty by the prosecutor, and everyone else that's in that office is affected by that.
Now, you've got him convicted.
No, it's not the fact that he has not been to trial yet. It's the perception, the public perception, that something terribly occurred, went terribly wrong, and that's what I'm talking about, is whether or not there's a criminal conviction. I don't know if Mr. Dunning's one way or the other. A jury will have to determine that, or it'll be worked out through his attorney and the prosecutors that are prosecuting that case. But you cannot escape that effect that his actions, he's a representative of that office, and his actions, just being charged, has caused a taint of the office, and we have to get beyond that. We have to let the public know that we are there to serve, and I will do that. I will do that as the prosecutor.
Now, how do you do that?
The first thing you do is you have to be accessible. And I've always been known to be very accessible. In fact, people have told me that, in fact, today a woman called and she asked specifically for me because she said I had been very helpful in the past. I'm out in the neighborhoods regularly, not just when I'm campaigning, but I've attended neighborhood organizational meetings over the years, over the last 29 years. People know me by name. In fact, I'll be in an elevator and someone will say, oh, I know you, you're that prosecutor lady. And sometimes they know my name even. They'll say, you were very helpful. Or a man on the street the other day came up, he was passing by and he goes, hey, I know you, you're the prosecutor lady. And I said, oh, yes, I am. And he said, yeah, you prosecuted me and I got 90 days. And I said, oh, you did? Because, you're a little apprehensive at that point if this individual is upset. But he smiled and he said, you were tough, you followed the law, but you were fair. You talked to me, you heard me out. And he said, and you know what, I was wrong. And he said, I've used you as an example to my children and told them you do not want to violate the laws in this area because Ms. O'Barry will prosecute you. And he said, I now am using that with my grandchildren. And I said, so how's that worked out? And he said, I have good children and I have good grandchildren. So that makes me very happy that, and that's what I'm saying about my reputation. You don't just one day say, I have integrity. You don't say it. You show it by example, by communicating with people. So again, your question was, How do you begin to do that? I would like to, when I say make the office more accessible, perhaps set up a line, a designated line for victims, for example, that victims can call in and check on the status of their case. I know myself that when I've called over to the prosecutor's office, and we all have phone trees where they say, call this office, push 1, push 2, push 3. I think that you need to have a person that they can contact so that they can ask their question and have a policy where someone will get back to them within 24 hours so that people don't think that they've been forgotten, that no one cares about them or cares about their concerns. And that goes for defendants as well. I often will have someone that's charged with a crime and they have lost their notice and they've called the court and they've been transferred around and eventually they get to me and it's nothing for me to go ahead. We have computers nowadays. I look it up for them. I tell them when it is. And people are so appreciative if you just communicate with them.
Let me ask you, we have about 2.5 minutes.
Oh, sorry.
So a couple of issues, both drug related. One is this epidemic that our community and most communities are facing over opioids and heroin. And, it's a crime, obviously. But isn't there a human side to this, and how do you feel these people should be dealt with?
You have different classifications of individuals. You have the person who is an addict, but they're not a dealer. In that type of situation, you have to look at the criminal history of the individual. You have to look at what their contact was with the drug, because it does not give regard to your ethnicity, your gender, your socioeconomic level. It affects all of us. And we have a lot of people that are not educated about the epidemic of the opioids, and they believe that their children, son, daughter, husband, wife, is not an addict. Well, Percocet, Vicodin, all of these kinds of things are opiates, and people need to be aware of that. Again, education. However, I had a gentleman that was in court yesterday, and he was there for frequenting in a drug house. When I looked at his criminal history of several convictions and the fact that he was on parole for a drug crime, we're not going to give that individual any break. That individual needs to be prosecuted to the fullest. Now, of course, that was just a misdemeanor charge, so there's no plea negotiation on that. That's plead to the charge. Mm-hmm. The concern, of course, for that individual is it will violate his parole. That's unfortunate for him because he is involved in drug activity. He is the person that is perpetuating that epidemic, that's obtaining those drugs and passing them on to others.
Let me switch to another topic, and we really have less than a minute to go. So we have any number of medical marijuana businesses operating in the city of Lansing. According to the courts, they're illegal. Why are they operating?
Well, the problem with the referendum vote is it left large gaps in the law. And according to federal law, they are illegal because dispensaries were never provided for in that legislation. However, there was a decision made at the law enforcement level and the prosecution level that they were not going to enforce closing down these dispensaries. That was a decision that was made. However, I feel that we need to follow the law, and the legislature has been working on closing those gaps. For example, we had an individual, had a home occupation, growing marijuana and drying it, and he claimed for his patients.
I'm going to have to cut you off. Other than a quick answer, are you going to try to shut them down?
We will, if they are violating zoning ordinances, which is the avenue that we can close down dispensaries.
All right, very good, Billy O'Berry. Best of luck to you in the Republican primary on August 2nd.
All right,
thanks for
you.
being on the show. Joining us now is the other candidate in the Republican primary, Monica Stevens. Monica, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Bert.
My pleasure, my pleasure. So I honestly don't know much about you. You're making your first run for elected office. I know you're an assistant attorney general for the state of Michigan, but what's your background?
Well, yes, thank you, Burl. Actually, I am a longtime resident of Ingham County. Approximately, I've been here for about 17 years. A few of the years I moved out of county for employment, but overall I've been here in Ingham County. I started out undergraduate at Michigan State University, and then from Michigan State University I went to Thomas Cooley Law School, downtown Lansing, and from there I made this my home. I have lived in I've lived in Mason, lived in East Lansing, I've lived in Lansing, had several jobs throughout the county, and as you say, I am currently now an Assistant Attorney General with Michigan Attorney General's office. I'm a hometown girl. I have several family members that live here in the county. In fact, I have a couple of nieces and nephews that go to East Lansing schools and also to Holt schools. I have an aunt that's been here for years, even prior to me coming here for my education.
Where were you born and raised?
And so I was born and raised in Berrien County.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And so, well, actually, I wasn't literally born there. A majority of my childhood was spent there, but I was born in the South.
Now, you want to do something, where in the South?
In Oklahoma.
In Oklahoma? I used
Yes.
to live in Norman.
Oh, okay. Yes.
So you're trying to do something that is no one else has done in Ingham County in a long time, which is get elected countywide as a Republican. So I have to ask you, why are you a Republican?
Well, sure. Well, you know, it's interesting because I've been asked that on the campaign trail, and actually I was Republican long before I understood the word Republican. I was a young girl, about 12 years old, and at our school, they would have the Rotary Club would come and adopt one or two students to go to their monthly meetings in the morning for breakfast, and I was assigned a county commissioner. And so I was sitting with the county commissioner, and we were having conversations, and she was asking me about my future plans in life. And she would kind of talk about the things that she believed. And the more I talked, she told me, she said, you know, you sound like a little conservative Republican, you know. And at that age, at 12 years old, I didn't know, what actually is a Republican. But she said a lot of what you've discussed here, you're probably a Republican. And so as I gotten older and in high school, and then when I went to college, and I was approached by different groups like the Young Republicans and different groups like that, I began to realize that my beliefs, my ideology lined up more with the Republican Party. I had the pleasure of being a student of Student Statesmanship Institute with James Muffet and years ago. And so just learning, biblical worldviews and conservative values and different things of that nature, I really began to realize that I am a Republican even before I knew exactly what the word entailed.
What is it that appeals to you about being a Republican?
Sure. Well, a couple of things. I do believe in the right to life. I do believe in smaller government. I believe in capitalism. I also believe in the family structure, traditional family structure. So a lot of my values are traditional values.
Do you believe in Donald Trump?
Well, I will say this. Initially, there were 17 candidates out there. So initially I started out with, other candidates, and as the party dwindled and dwindled and dwindled, I had to delve into more, as it gotten smaller, down to, Casey, Cruz, Trump, and look at each one and what they stand for. So I'm certainly still active, still educating myself, still learning, still watching as the race continues. And, I'm a precinct delegate.
That'll be exciting.
Yes. So I'm really just staying active and knowing, I think this is a very interesting election season. Just the fact that we started with 17, we're down to 1, how everything kind of, came into play. We've got the convention coming up in Cleveland. So I'm all ears, I'm all ears.
Well, let's talk about the prosecutor's office. Of course, it's quite an important year because we're the first time Stuart Dunnings will not be on the ballot, and also the reason that he is not on the ballot, or he may not have run anyway, but clearly the office has been done some damage. And wondering how you feel that can be addressed.
Sure. Well, I would absolutely concur that the office, there's been damage done, you know. When citizens choose to elect the official to represent them, you know, myself as just a citizen, just a regular resident of Ingham County, you know, you expect that public official to uphold the office with integrity, credibility, you expect transparency, and so certainly I feel that I was let down along with majority of the other citizens that I've spoken with. I think it was such shock, you know, and disappointment. And now we're in the position, you know, midway through the election year trying to, you know, find a permanent candidate. You know, we have an interim prosecutor, but then trying to find a permanent candidate. So with that being said, I think the role of the next prosecutors, particularly myself, is to restore credibility to the office, to restore integrity to the office, and to keep victims and justice for victims at the forefront when doing that. And so I'm looking forward to doing that.
How can you have any specifics in mind? Are there any programs you expect to unroll if you get elected?
Well, one is that, and I have the pleasure, the interesting thing of being an outsider, so to speak, because I'm a former assistant prosecutor in Jackson County. So I have the actual experience of being a prosecutor. Mm-hmm. But I have the blessing also of not being in that office. And so I think that's very beneficial because I'm coming into it with a set of fresh eyes, you know, a new perspective. So in coming into that position is, number one, assessing, you know, where the office is now. And after assessing where the office is to, number one, start with something specific such as open door policy or transparency, that the public, the general public, if they need access to the office, particularly victims who want to know, where does my case stand? What's going on? What's happening to the defendant? That they're welcome to come into the office and speak. Welcome to call. Make sure that there's open access as far as social media, whether there be an accessible email or a website or something they can come and get information, and to speak about their concerns in the community. Community policing will also be important, that I would look to work with law enforcement.
What would be the role of the prosecutor's office in community policing?
Well, the role of the prosecutor's office is, it starts out with a basic understanding of what actually the prosecutor does. And I've found it interesting in my campaign, speaking with a lot of the community, they're not really sure exactly what it is a prosecutor does from day to day. Mm-hmm. And so I do find it very enjoyable to explain what is it that I do when I was an assistant prosecutor from day to day. And part of that is when law enforcement is out in the community doing their job and they send warrants, okay, mm-hmm. arrest warrants to the prosecutor's office. It's the role of the prosecutors to take those arrest warrants and decide, are we going to authorize these warrants? And so you with that, you take and you have to determine, was a crime committed? Did the defendant likely commit that crime? Did the crime happen within our jurisdiction? And are the elements of the crime met? And when you take all this into consideration, then you decide, yes, we're going to go ahead and authorize the warrant. And then that kicks off the prosecutorial process. And so with community policing, you have your law enforcement out there working with the community, whether the community is providing tips for criminal activity that they know about. The community is voicing their concerns that there might be specific criminal activity in their neighborhood. and they want the officers to be aware. And we may need their information when it comes to witness testimony, background information on defendants. So I think there's a place for both law enforcement and the prosecutor's office and the community to all work in tandem to keep our community safe.
I want to talk to you about a couple of drug-related issues. One is the epidemic in our community, but across the nation with opioids, and how should people be treated in our justice system? They are obviously violating the law in many cases by buying them on the street, yet there's a human side to this, that they are addicts.
You know, I will say this. Number one, the court system, it does take into consideration the human element of it, okay? So a crime is committed, you know, drug-related crime, opiates, or what have you. But how the courts take that into consideration is through your specialty courts. So whether you have your drug courts, your sobriety courts, but those courts are set up to pair that defendant with services that can address those addictions. Along with the courts dealing with it, with specialty courts, also I think the law in and of itself takes into consideration some of those things. And what I mean by that is you have different level of offenses. So someone does a drug crime, it's just a mere misdemeanor. You know, maybe they're a repeat offender. Maybe, you know, if it's just basic drug use, misdemeanor. Possession, 1 year. And then as it goes on, delivery and manufacture, now we're into felony crimes. So I think just the substantive law in and of itself, by leveling out the category of the crime, takes that into consideration. Then you have the specialty courts. In addition to that, I think it involves also the various aspects of the community.
The other drug-related issue I wanted to ask you about is medical marijuana dispensaries. They're flourishing in the city of Lansing. There's a moratorium on new ones, but they're all illegal according to the state courts, and yet they don't get shut down. Why is that, and what would be your approach?
Well, certainly my approach is to enforce the law as it is. And when those cases are brought to me, you know, that there are dispensaries, and then that's when, as a prosecutor, I move into action. You're violating the state law. You're going to have to be prosecuted like anyone else.
But if you were, obviously they're not being brought to the prosecutor. Stuart Dunning was opposed to them, but he never shut them down. Isn't there a disconnect here that they don't get to the prosecutor, but we know they're illegal?
You know, and I can't speak on the specifics of what Mr. Dunnings did in that office. Again, you know, as being an outsider, so I don't want to pass an opinion on what I do not know. But certainly I think if it is brought to the attention of the office, as a prosecutor, it's incumbent upon me to address it like any other
Unfortunately, we are out of time. I wish you the best of luck on
Okay.
August 2nd, and thanks so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you so much, bro.